Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Spending Time. I'm David Brennan and I'm here with Zach Piña from aBlogtoWatch, also represented the team in, where was it? Where was the last Apple event?
Yeah, we were down in Cupertino at the new headquarters. I'm not sure. I wasn't there last year, but I think was the event at the new theater. It was in the Steve Jobs Auditorium.
I was there I think 2 years ago. I think it was in 2016 that I went there, and at that time it was in downtown San Francisco actually. So it was just some, I don't know, some event hall or something like that.
Oh no.
So you could see the spaceship from the outside?
Yeah, oh yeah. The auditorium is interesting. It's built into the hill, but on the top of the hill there's this kind of large circular glass enclosure.
Wow.
That they had food tables and stuff set up, and then within that room there's two sets of stairs that's kind of spiraled down underground into the auditorium that curves into the hill. But on the top of the hill, within the main kind of glass enclosure, you can kind of look out over this grassy field, and you can see the actual campus is right there. So it's pretty interesting. Like the auditorium was clearly designed to be kind of for these types of events where it brings media and the types of people that get invited to these events to the Apple campus to get just like a taste without the security nightmare of like having hundreds or even thousands of people actually inside the physical campus. So just a taste, but it was pretty cool to be down there. And they fly hundreds of Apple support staff from all of the different, like the Genius bars and all the different retail locations all over the world to come support for the event. So these people work as like greeters and checking badges, and even like helping out with some of the catering stuff and directing like the flow of traffic. We're all people from different Apple stores around the world, which I thought was a interesting touch. I'm not sure if they've done that before, but it helped kind of create this really warm, like excited environment that I really kind of wasn't expecting for like what was by and large a tech conference. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. For technical reasons, you can't see my screen right now, but I just Googled Audemars Piguet building just to find, because I recall that they were building some sort of a concentrical building just next to the manufacturer in the Valley de Joux, I believe is where they are. And I just wanted to pull this up because my question that I was like, it's sort of a rhetorical question, but can you imagine a watch brand doing something of this magnitude for essentially, a product release? And I understand we're talking about Apple, but at the same time, we are comparing Apple to, the watch industry, and Apple launches products once a year. Usually, well, when it's a really big deal, it's every 2 years. When a genuinely new iPhone comes up, when it's not an S release, but it's like you go from 7 to 8 or from 8 to 10 or something like that. So basically my point is that, can you imagine something like this, you having experienced the Apple event happening in the watch industry?
No, I can't. And kind of having done Basel and a few other watch events this year, I can now say that it's really hard to imagine a watch company being... It's funny because a lot of the watch brands, even when you go to Basel at some of the meetings and everything, the brands feel... I wouldn't say standoffish, but the brands, they don't feel particularly warm in that they... I don't know. I'm not sure how to frame this without it sounding like people are jerks, but like at the same time, at the Apple event, I mean there was this is one of the most influential companies of this generation and previous generations in the world, and they're still inviting people, and they created this warm environment, and I genuinely felt like they wanted me to be there. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know who any of us were. But like it felt like they wanted media. They were excited to bring a product to us, and they were excited to share it. And that really, truly, say whatever you want about Apple, say whatever you want about the watch, about the devices. Yeah. They created a really, really unique environment at this event, and that feeling is not part of what the Swiss do. I think by and large it's just not. Yeah, so to answer your question, no, I can't see any Swiss brand doing that. But at the same time, I do really love how Apple, and by and large how the Swiss industry does these kinds of releases, where Basel is exciting to a certain degree, where there's kind of a novelty in things not being known being released and shown to the public for the very first time on a stage. And I think in this era of the way the information travels and can be leaked via Instagram and via the internet, it's really cool to see something kind of unveiled before your eyes. And I hope that never goes away to a certain degree, because it keeps things exciting for us. But also, like, I don't know, there's sort of a childlike wonder in being bearing witness to something like that. So I would hope the Swiss watch industry, and maybe Audemars has something like that in the works.
Nah.
I doubt it.
but you raised some excellent points, actually, with them making you feel like you were welcome. That was actually the same, happened in when I was there in 2016. I just looked it up. It was in 2016. At the WWDC event, which is more of a software event, but there were also some news and some stuff happening with the Apple Watch. And to be honest, I also think that was sort of like, not a test, but something, like, of Apple inviting us to, we've been part of the original Apple Watch launch and all that kind of stuff, but these massive brands, they maintain relationship with the media in mysterious ways, and sometimes it's part of like, hey, here's an event, it's not really your thing that much, but why don't you just come over on your own money and maybe see, if you can cover it, well. And yeah, that was 2 years ago. We've come a long way since then, but that still was pretty interesting. As for this thing happening in the watch industry, my thinking that I just realized is gonna possibly happen is the Swatch Group pulling out of Baselworld, which is already a thing, and it's been confirmed. I talked with many different people from many different Swatch Group brands, locally and in other countries and whatever all you can imagine, and everyone said that yes, indeed, it is happening. Swatch Group is pulling out from Baselworld. And so, can you imagine the Swatch Group throwing 50 million Swiss francs, which is their alleged annual budget for Baselworld, 50 million Swiss francs, which is basically $50 million these days, at an event. Which I doubt will actually happen. I honestly, genuinely, I give it like less than 5% chance that Swatch Group will pick up all its brands and say, oh, okay, we just found a nice place in Lausanne or Geneva or wherever, and let's put everyone down, including the ones who are not really that top of their game because of reasons, like Mito and a few other ones who we actually like, but they cannot really, live or, in the same sort of spotlight as Omega and others do. But still, my point is, just to wrap this up, is that I think there's a good chance that early next year we're going to see something awesome if Swatch Group actually make it happen. Because honestly, they should show the world, or at least Baselworld, how it's done. If they pulled out from Baselworld because it wasn't good enough, then all right, let's show us. Let's amaze us.
Well, and I think that can be done without spending Baselworld money. I mean, I feel like half the problem with Baselworld is that cost is, for a lot of brands, that cost is borne upon them from the Baselworld organization and not from them actually getting the most value for dollar. So if Swatch Group is in the driver's seat and they decide they're going to throw a weekend event or something, like you said, at some location to showcase various aspects of their brands in some capacity, they're in the driver's seat in terms of how the money gets spent at these types of activations, and they can get really, really creative. And I genuinely hope that they do. And I mean, I know that within the industry, them pulling out was news that really worried a lot of people. But as media, and I think as a consumer, I think it's great news. I mean, honestly, I really do. And I mean, I think SIHH hasn't fully taken flight yet in terms of creativity, but everybody that you talk to that was at that event, I mean, that event is a very different beast than Baselworld, and for good reasons, not because it's just another event. It's also a great way for people to be able to see more, a more comprehensive look at these brands that they might have either skipped over at Baselworld or had to blow through really quickly because there's just so much to see at Basel. So I think breaking up the calendar a little bit and doing these different events is a really good thing, and I hope Swatch takes full advantage of that. I would imagine if they were smart, they would take 50 million and say, okay, we'll do $20 million for, you know, an event or multiple events, and then we'll take the rest of that and we'll invest it in R&D, or we'll invest it in digital marketing or ad, or, you know, whatever. I mean, I would assume that they would reallocate those dollars. They wouldn't just say, okay, we have $50 million, we're gonna spend it on a different type of event.
For 50 million, out of those 50 million, 5 million we're paying to fly all the marketing people to the next Apple event.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Can you imagine?
Could you imagine?
You go into the venue and it's just full of Swatch Group people.
Yeah, that would be.
With their moleskin notepads and stuff. No Apple logos, you know, like lighting up in the dark, you know, room. It's just expensive pens, you know, scraping away on way too thick paper. That's the only.
You know, but I've seen this happen in the bike industry. Does not have the same kind of money that the watch industry has, but Trek Bicycles, which is one of the three sort of big bicycle brands in the world, pulled out of what is essentially the Basel World of Bikes, this trade show called Interbike. So they pulled out of that a number of years ago, and they hold their own special Trek event at their headquarters, which is in Wisconsin, once a year. And they invite all their dealers, they invite their retail partners, their influencers. It feels kind of like a family event and not like an industry trade show type event. And it's definitely something that people look forward to. It's hands-on time with the brand. It's very personalized. There's plenty of time to actually like ride bikes and do other stuff. You're not like wandering around a trade show floor. I mean, it's really, granted, again, the bike industry is dramatically different than how the Swiss industry operates, but that to me is how you create affinity towards your brand, is you do something personal like that. You pull out of the mainstream, you do something semi-exclusive, something personal, but you still create an avenue for your news to get out into the world. And you do your releases, you do all your stuff. I mean, it's everybody kind of wins in that regard. And you, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd be giving the Swiss industry a little bit too much credit if I said that that's exactly what they would do, but I think that's what they should do.
Let's hope so. Yes. Yeah, fingers
exactly.
Crossed. It's something immersive.
Yeah, cooler heads prevail.
Speaking of immersive, let's talk about a larger screen on the Apple Watch.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the most marketing connection I've ever done on this podcast.
Good
but anyway,
good try.
Can I begin with what I don't like? And then we'll go to
absolutely.
some place that's nicer. What I don't like is Apple launching these products with images that are. I'm looking at the Apple.com opening screen. So if you go there, you will see this picture that went viral, that leaked before the phone actually got, before the actual debut of the new phones, and it shows two gold Apple iPhones on top of one another, and they both show a planet that curves around the screen, or arches across the screen rather. And it's done in a way, because it's an arch in basically a rectangle. Some parts are black, and you cannot see the notch. So it's not a screen that shows a full image, that's full with an image rather. It's just, it's done in a way that you don't realize that the screen actually doesn't go all the way to the edge, and that there's a big ass notch on the top of the screen. And so it's clever in a way, and of course it's in Apple's best interest to depict its products, in a way that highlights its strengths and hides its weaknesses. But I think it's way too obvious at this point. And if I look at the Apple Watch, which you go to apple.com/watch and you open this page, the first thing you see is the Apple Watch, of course, at a slight angle, photographed, or it's rendered, to be more specific, and it's an all black screen with like some text on it. So you cannot tell how large the screen actually is. It gives you the illusion of all of the front of the watch being screen, but then you scroll down a little bit and then you realize, yes, it's a third better, and the third larger. Generally speaking, I think it's 32 and 35%. But it's not as large as the opening screen makes it appear. No,
they definitely kind of hide it a little bit. And that was sort of the buzzword that in the once the actual presentation was over, everybody runs upstairs to this this gallery where you can shoot a bunch of photos and stuff of all the products that are live. Yeah, it was a stampede for lack of a better term. And the buzzword that every Apple representative, every station had was that, oh, the screens are 35% larger, and edge to edge was a term that was being thrown around pretty liberally. But it's not really fully edge to edge. I mean, and to your point, they say it's edge to edge, and in a lot of those, the media assets, the screens are dark, and so whatever image is on it, it looks like it wraps fully around. But then when you actually get it in your hand, you see that, like,
totally doesn't.
You know, the edges are kind of curved, and it starts to go into the curve of where the case curvature sort of begins. It really doesn't go all the way to the edge. I mean, the main photo that we lead with in our hands-on with the water screen, I mean, you can clearly see there's 2 or 3 millimeters of the edge where the screen just kind of stops, and there's still that black glass case band essentially that goes around the edge. So yeah, I agree. Bigger, not edge to edge. Those images are definitely a little bit misleading, especially for them to lead with those as the press. But you know, it's
To your credit, you make the watch look great. I actually like it better in the hands-on picture than I like on Apple's official images. I genuinely do. I look at the shot that you did with the water, this purple and green stuff happening on the tile. And I look at it and I think to myself, that looks actually pretty good. It looks like a watch face with a bezel. But if I go to the Apple side and I look at it, I'm like, oh my god, that's massive. It's somehow like the proportions on the pictures are just not as nice, you know, for the lack of a better term, to the watch. You know, I guess, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing this in the metal. So what were your first impressions actually?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. That black edge really does look a little bit like a bezel, and it almost lends it more of a watch-like characteristic. Look, I think the most important thing about this device is that, and honestly, I would say that I felt almost relieved throughout the presentation, because the more they were talking about the health benefits and those types of implications on how the device could be used throughout one's life, it really started to feel less like a watch. I mean, it's called a watch ostensibly, but sort of in the same way that like an iPhone is it's not a phone. There's barely anything phone-like about, you know, what I'm holding in my hand right now. There's barely anything watch-like about this, with the exception of the fact that it occupies real estate on your wrist. I feel like that's really about where the similarities end. And when the Apple Watch came out back in 2015, they made such a strong case for it being a watch. Oh, it has a crown. You know, they were using all this watch terminology. Exactly. They were using a lot of the complications, the crown. They were using a lot of terminology, exactly, and emotion-based, really emotion-based design, using like luxury metals and stainless steel casing. All of these processes and everything were designed to appeal. It was like they were trying to win the affirmation of watch people. Yes. That they sort of forgot that, like, at the end of the day, this is not going to be a watch. This is never destined to be a watch. Yes, it's destined to compete with that real estate on your wrist, but at the same time, not a watch. And I think this is the very first iteration that we've seen since 2015 where they've finally just said, okay, we get it, not a watch. It's going to do all this other stuff. And I think watch purists, like people, like I said in the article, people who've taken offense to Apple calling it a watch, should be relieved. And by relieved, I mean, I say that with a bit of sarcasm, because this whole time, like, if you don't like something, don't buy it. Exactly. I feel like we've had to defend ourselves for 4 years on the blog.
Oh my god!
Why are you covering this? Not a watch. Well, it's, if Apple's going to call it a watch and it's affecting the watch industry, we're going to cover it. Sorry. Don't read it or don't buy it. Like.
And it was a good idea to cover it, because now with Series 4, and by the way, you raised some excellent points, I think, right there, in terms of how it transformed and how it was first announced, and yeah, I think we made the right call of covering it before it actually happened. Ariel wrote an article a few years before the Apple Watch, and say, where he contemplated what's the Apple iWatch, he called it, because of course everyone thought that they would they were going to call it the iWatch, which they didn't, which I think is pretty funny. And actually, there's something on that note that I will try not to forget to add. But anyway, so we've been covering this for so long, and people have been coming, you know, like I'm sure there was like a march somewhere in like with forks and whatever, you know, like in downtown Geneva, like aBlogtoWatch and smartwatches, say no to smartwatches, and
That's
now
right.
now things are finally coming to a spot where I think the Apple Watch and perhaps the Samsung Galaxy Watch, which was hit here to cold, the Galaxy Gear and then the Gear S, whatever. These have developed to a point where I myself, who I don't really like the idea of wearing a smartwatch, would consider these, because they are finally coming to a point where I can say that, wow, these are really rounded off. But the point that people need to understand, I think, is that when it comes to a product that is this complicated, you have to bring it to the market and keep on working on it. You cannot just work on it in an isolated environment. Look what Tesla did with the Roadster. They brought it out, not the new one, the old one, like 8 years ago or 7 years ago. They debuted it and it was their first car, as far as I know. Maybe there's some Tesla purists out there who will say no, because whatever. But they brought it to the market, and look where they are now, and how much work there has been in that regard. And the same with Apple Watch. They needed to debut it, and they needed the feedback of all the buyers and also, I guess, watch people. And to go back to how the iWatch and the watch, when they launched it and they called it the Apple Watch, and they launched it in gold, and you call the things on it complications, that's how you knew that they really wanted to just kick in the door and at least show themselves on the steps, saying, hey, we're Apple and we are pretty much, like, we are effing here, okay?
Yeah.
We are effing here. We called it a watch and not an iWatch because it's a watch, not just a technological, a piece of technology. It's more than that. It's meant to replace your watch. That's why it's available in gold. That's why it's available in steel. That's why we make all these straps and all these crazy bracelets and give all these complications and call them that. That's why it has a crown, because we want it to be a watch. And now, 4 years later, it's drifting away from that. Like you said excellently, it's drifting a little bit away. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah,
and people are calming down. Sorry, just one last
more.
note. Yeah, just want to think that as this is happening, people are becoming more and more, have you seen in the comments and everywhere online, more and more accepting of the Apple Watch and less upset about it.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've noticed that sea change, not just on aBlogtoWatch, but on other media outlets that have been covering it, whether they're watch media or they are in tech. I mean, there's definitely a slight attitude shift, and it's interesting because this particular iteration, I think the Series 3, once they added a data plan to it, it did start to feel, it didn't feel like a pivot. It felt like the first two iterations were kind of half-baked, and that this should have been there all along. But this particular iteration with the electrocardiogram, as well as with like the fall protection, essentially the SOS capability, it feels more like a pivot where they're trying to get this device in. They had the president of the American Heart Association on stage in the keynote, and I mean, to me, that's a huge signal that they are going after. I mean, this is a device that's prescribed by doctors. So I mean, at that point, a lot of the swagger and the attitude that you described a moment ago when Apple Watch kind of hit the scene, with them trying to win over the purists and kind of stake their claim, saying this is a watch, we're going to take over the watch industry. Now they've quietly backed away from that sort of braggadocio, and I think at this point they're very much saying, like, you need to have this. You don't need a watch. You need this device. And I think that's good news for the pitchfork army on the internet. They're gonna have to find something else to hate, because I think
finally,
at the end of the day, finally, seriously, what could possibly be next? Like if you love mechanical watches, you're gonna wear a mechanical watch. I mean, at the end of the day, like, Apple is not saying we're trying to replace your mechanical watch. I've never understood the the mindset of people feeling like their tastes are under assault.
Well, the only thing, I think Apple was a little bit hostile about that, or they actually had like an aggressive
that's true.
into
That's
it,
very true.
and they keep on comparing them to others, which they have to, because one of the first slides that I can remember from this presentation a couple of days ago or a week ago said #1 watch in the world.
That's exactly right.
And
That's
Rolex
exactly right.
and etc. And then you're like, oh my god, like how did that happen? And it totally happened. And that's, I think, but like you say, I really honestly do not understand why people still dedicate the time and the energy to create a Discuss account and type in, it's not a watch. You wear it on your wrist and it tells the time. It's a watch.
Yeah.
And on this basis, these are the same people who would have said, like 40 years ago for a quartz watch, it's not a watch.
Yeah, exactly.
So
the thing is like, you look at all manners of fashion and utility and all of these other spaces where you can choose to wear or purchase something that you like, versus you can choose to wear or purchase something that serves a very specific utility in your life. I mean, to me, it's as simple as like, you could wear ultra comfortable Skechers sneakers, or you could wear like a pair of cool leather boots. What's your choice going to be? I mean, they both occupy the same space on your feet. You can't wear them at the same time. They both ensure that you can go outside. I mean, it's as simple as that to me. I mean, one asserts sort of a style preference and asserts a little bit of your own personality, and the other is purely like comfortable.
So would you say like a Casio FW91 is not a watch?
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. It
is.
It's exactly a watch. It's always been a watch. Yeah. Where do you draw the line?
See? It's actually what people would have called 40 years ago not a watch is the epitome of a watch today.
That's very, very true.
That's an interesting point on which we can end, I believe. I think we promised in the beginning of this podcast, addressing some other issues and subjects and whatnot, but we went from Swatch Group buying 1 million Apple Watch event tickets to the Casio of the FW91.
That's exactly
so that makes
right.
That makes it a true spending time episode. Zach, you want to add something in closing?
I real quick, you'd asked a little bit about first impressions. I know not to completely upend the transition, but a lot of people have asked kind of on Instagram or in the story as well how it wears. And I have a pretty small wrist, and I think people worried about the size of the new device. Going from 42 to 44 millimeters and 38 to 40 millimeters now. Even with a pretty small wrist, I think the 44 is kind of the way to go. And I can't wait for you to get one on your wrist as well, because I think the 40 felt really small. And when the watch is 44 millimeters, that's essentially the lug-to-lug distance, which is actually pretty short and wears nice and compact. So I think a lot of people are gonna really like the size change. But I do think that this is a device that is gonna surprise a lot of people when they finally check one out in person and see that like there are watch-like qualities to it, and but like the real world application puts it much further from that three-hand mechanical piece that's probably on your wrist right now as you're listening to this. So rest easy.
Yeah, exactly. Or if your watch has more hands than 3, then all the better for you.
That's exactly right.
We're happy for you.
That's right. That's right.
Thanks everyone for listening, and thank you, Zach, for tuning in, and we'll catch up with you guys next time.
Thanks for having me, David.